Welcome to the Manor, guys. Today we're going to talk about the Nightmare Dystopia. I'm Julien McBain. This is the Julien McBain Show. Alright, so, yeah, let's talk about the dystopia we live in. This isn't something I thought I'd ever cover, but it's become so obvious and so pervasive that I can't really get around it anymore. And as all of you know, I tend to avoid geopolitics on my channel. But there comes a point where you just have to address the elephant in the room. And so that's what I'm going to do here today. We're going to talk about the dystopia that we now live in and just try and figure out how we got here. And, you know, if we got to deal with all the bad parts of the dystopia, what happened to all the fun parts that Hollywood always offered us, you know? And I'm going to start there because I don't know about you, but I grew up in the 80s and 90s. And I remember things like Blade Runner. I remember, I'm trying to think of other ones. The Fifth Element was a pretty good indication of nightmare dystopia. You know, your cyberpunk lifestyle, Shadowrun. Shadowrun was awesome. You know, you absolutely had, you know, an extreme authoritarian rule, but at the same time, even though that things were ruled over rather oppressively, somehow the people on the bottom still managed to have a certain modicum of freedom, even beyond what we have now, because, you know, they'd have drugs free flowing around, and money would change hands easily, and you'd get these wild cybernetics, prehensile hair, you know, that glowed neon purple. You know, we don't have the cybernetics, we don't have the wetware, we don't have the, well, dryware is kind of being developed. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the two terms, in cybernetics, cyberization, you have two forms of cybernetics. You have dryware, which are your prosthetics that you can see. So someone loses an arm is attached, that's dryware because it interacts with the dry world. Wetware, on the other hand, is something you implant inside of you that is not generally exposed. So like if they put, Elon Musk is currently developing a chip called Neuralink. And they take out a piece of skull and they insert the chip and it becomes flush with your skull. And the filaments go into the neurons of your brain to provide an interface, and it's permanent. But because it only interacts with your organs, or in this case your brain and nervous system, it's considered wetware. And it's powered by your own body's electrical field. You know, subdermal RFID chips are something that exists, and that is wetware. That's a very primitive form of wetware. And so, you know, if we're going this direction, which honestly I wish we wouldn't, but if we're going this direction, why can't we have the things that we saw in all the cyberpunk movies? You know, where's all the neon? Where are the hover cars? There's the funny thing is that this came about quickly. 20 years. About 20 years is all it took. And that may seem like a really long time, but it's really not. Humans have always been predisposed toward authoritarianism, which is unfortunate, but very, very true. Historically, humans have lived under authoritarian regimes more often than not. So that part was the easy part. But in this case, we're actually in a very unique landscape where you have three major tech giants that are doing everything that people were afraid the state would do. And they should be afraid if the state is doing it. They absolutely should be. Because we have seen historically that when the state puts into place mass surveillance and they put into place basically thought control, because that's what these tech giants are doing. They're instituting a form of thought control. And I'm not saying that this is, like brainwashing or anything like that. I don't think there's a bunch of people in a dark, smoky room twirling their mustaches going, "Nyah-ha-ha." Yes, that was a Tim Pool quote. Go check him out if you haven't. What I think is happening is they built these platforms for one reason. And believe it or not, that reason was not so that people could communicate better. They built them to sell advertising. And so they created algorithms to better their ability to advertise. They also built their algorithm to feed people what they wanted to see, because that's how you sell product. It's actually, like, social media is the most brilliant marketing tool ever created. And I say that as a marketer. Like, marketing is my job. And it is the most brilliant marketing tool ever invented, because it puts people in front of ads and in front of information that they want to see. And it cuts out the things they don't want to see. So see, they've created this extremely powerful tool to not only determine what it is you want, but it also determines how you think. It determines what your values are. It can predict your schedule, because it needs to know when to put those ads in front of you. And again, this isn't, they didn't do it for the they didn't do it to control the population, right? This isn't some fascistic tool designed to turn us into slaves. It's literally the most powerful advertising engine ever invented. Your three major social media companies. You've got Facebook, which, actually, let's start with YouTube. Let's start with this platform right here. YouTube is the second largest search engine owned by the largest search engine in the world. That's very important, so I'm going to repeat it. YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world, powered by the largest search engine in the world. Google might be the most powerful private entity in existence. Okay. They have surpassed the Rockefeller Organization. They have surpassed all of these. They're more powerful than JP Morgan, which was arguably one of the most powerful ones in the last era. I mean, he financed an entire century. I would say Google's more powerful than JP Morgan. Shh. Google's listening. So they use that. They record, in a sense, not directly. Like, they don't have a history of exact searches, I don't think, but they take keywords out of your normal searches and they put that in a cookie. And they store that cookie on your computer. You can clear that out, so that when you go to search for something, it knows what you previously searched for, so that it's easier for you to search for it. Now, the good part of that is if there's something that you really enjoy, you can just type a couple letters and it searches it over and over and over again, and it's right there. But it also means it's going to default what you see to these things you've previously searched. It also means that if there's anything counterbalancing, it's going to exclude those in the results. Now, this happens on YouTube, but it's not nearly as prevalent as on other platforms. But it does happen frequently on YouTube. And that's where the whole theory of rabbit holes, which was actually scientifically debunked, comes from. The idea is you search for one thing, they're going to suggest things that tail off of what you just watched, which are going to search more, and it's just going to get more and more into that murk. But actually what they did is, when it looked like that was happening, Google tweaked the algorithm to also show things that, if it was like, if an opinion piece came out and the opinion piece had one political bend to it, they tweaked the algorithm to make sure that some of the search results would show the opposite political bend to it to balance things out, which I think was very, very smart. And I don't know how this works outside of the United States because I've never used Google outside. I've actually never left the United States. It's something that I need to do. Unfortunately, my life has not given me the opportunity, per se. I mean, I've had opportunity. Well, no, because the one opportunity I had to go to Canada, we had to cancel because we had a friend with us who was pregnant and she started to get car sick. And you don't mess around with someone who's pregnant when they're getting car sick. You go home. I haven't taken the time to leave the country yet. I need to. Once, we're allowed to travel again. So I'm going to admit that up front. But it does. Google has kind of tried to, and I'm not saying they're doing a good job at it, but they have tried to prevent their search engine from echo chamber syndrome. Facebook, on the other hand, has done exactly the opposite. Now, Facebook has declared that it doesn't necessarily take any one stance on any issue. And I'm carefully skirting around the politics of this because that would be very easy to dive into, and I'm trying not to. I'm trying to look at the technical symptoms of it without getting into the geopolitical symptoms of it. But the thing about Facebook is that it uses its advertising algorithms to deliver ads, and it doesn't care. And it's possible that it shouldn't have to. I mean, we can argue that you can argue that the two arguments are it's a private platform, they can do what they want, which is true, fundamentally speaking. It can also be argued that they are so large and so powerful that they are a town square, which is why I think that when they came out and said, we're not going to, Zuckerberg recently came out and said we're not going to be the arbiters of truth. That was a very smart move by him. Because it basically says, look, we're a platform, we take no responsibility, and we're protected by Section 230. But at the same time, it also means they have no responsibility to counterbalance things. And I mean, you can go into your settings and you can find all sorts of things in there. They've actually calculated algorithmically your political bend. Left, right, or center. I'm dead serious. Go into your settings in Facebook. If you look around, you can find it. There's a YouTube video on exactly where it is. I don't have that pulled up anywhere. But it's true. And Facebook makes no bones about it. They're not trying to hide this. If you ask someone from Facebook, they'll be like, yeah, that's what we do. Which is good that they admit to it, but at the same time, it's like, when did we allow ourselves to be so determined by algorithm? When did we become a product of algorithm rather than the user of the algorithm? Because the algorithm feeds us what we look for, and then we look for things because it's all we see due to the algorithm. So it's creating a feedback loop. And it creates these echo chambers. It also means that when you get into, when you look for something constantly, or when you're kind of on an obsessive streak, for lack of a better term, like if you're really into boats, right? All you're gonna see, and you're looking for boats, and you put it in search a few times, all of a sudden everything you see is going to be about boats. You're gonna see boats, you're gonna see boat motors, you're gonna see accessories, captain's hats, guidebooks. All of these things are just gonna feed back. All the ads are gonna be about yacht clubs. This is how the algorithm works. And so your whole life will become about boats. And then in order to deprogram the algorithm from doing that, you actually have to search something else a lot. And finally the boats will go away, and then you'll be looking at planes. And yes, I'm using two very deliberately almost silly examples. But they're not silly because I've seen it happen. I search for something inane. Oh gosh, I can't even think of a good example right now. Oh. I searched for an ice cream machine at work yesterday. For work. So I searched for this ice cream machine for my boss. Yeah, the benefit to working for a small business is sometimes the boss gives you really strange and interesting things to do. Go find me so most of the world calls it soft serve. Here in Vermont, we call them creamies. Go find a creamy machine. Okay. I'm willing to bet I've got like 7 advertisements for creamy machines the next time I go on Facebook. It wouldn't be the first time something like that happened. But what this tells us is that these 3 tech giants are controlling us. And again, I don't think that it's any conspiracy. I don't think that it's necessarily overly deliberate. They're not doing it for the purpose of oppressing people. They're doing it for the purpose of serving ads, for selling stuff. It does, however, bring up a lot of questions. You know, at what point is it too powerful? At what point do we need to check our behavior because the algorithm is too efficient? At what point do we realize we are operating off of an algorithm, not off of free will? I'm not saying free will has stopped existing. Of course it exists. We can always break out of it. But humans are creatures of habit. I mean, why do you think smoking is still so prevalent? Why do you think alcoholism is still so prevalent? You know, you are a creature of habit. No matter how much you try not to be, no matter how spontaneous you think you are a creature of habit. And what the tech giants are doing is they're using those habits to sell you things. Because that's what they're designed to do. And it's created this really interesting cyberpunk dystopia we live in. Because what if they're not trying to sell you a product, but they're trying to sell you an idea? I mean, that's honestly all marketing is. They're selling you an idea. You're not being sold the widget. You're being sold the idea of what the widget can do, what problem the widget can solve. So let's take boats as an example. And I'm on the dint of boats because, well, I'm frequently on the dint of boats, even though I've never owned one. So let's say you want to go fishing. So you start looking for a boat. The ads that they're throwing in front of you is not to sell the boat. The boat is the end result, but that's not what they're selling you. What they're selling you is the idea of what you can do on the boat. So let's say you're looking for a rowboat, right? Fairly inexpensive, kind of a pain, but it's what you need for fishing, right? So you start looking for rowboats. And they're like, you know, it'd be easier if I had an outboard motor or a trolling motor, because that lets you get around the lake a little bit more efficiently. So now you go from strict rowboats to motorized boats that could be rowboats or, you know, have a little outboard motor on them. Not speedboats or anything, but for fishing. But then it starts showing you things like pontoon boats, which are also great for fishing, but they're also good for relaxing. And so they start to show you these baseline pontoon boats that are strictly good for fishing or with the fishing package on it. So now they're selling you the idea of, instead of just a basic fishing trip, like let's say you might be a subsistence fisherman or angler. That's the term now. You know, you go out, you fish every couple of weeks, you bring home 5 or 6, and you use it to supplement your food. But now, instead of the vision of the basic subsistence fishing, you've got the idea of relaxing in this nice chair, casting a line. Now it's very relaxing. There's a back to it. You know, most rowboats don't have backs in their seats. They're just basic benches. And then, you know, when you're not fishing, you have the idea of taking your friends out, maybe having a barbecue on the boat. They're selling you this image of what you can do on a lake. So now, not only have they sold you on the idea of a boat, which you need for fishing, because you need that fish to live. But they've also sold you on the idea of using that boat for more than just fishing. They've sold you relaxation. They've sold you recreation. Recreation sells a hell of a lot better than work does. Now, the two things that sell the most are recreation and things that make work more efficient so you don't have to do as much of it. So now you've got this idea that the boat doesn't necessarily just have to be so that I can add fish to my freezer. I can use it for fun. So now you look for the nicer pontoon boats, and they start throwing better pontoon boats in front of you. Instead of baseline, now they've got the leather seats and the canopies and the lavatory that with the pop-up tent thing that you can use. So now, not only have you, in the end, you don't just buy a boat. You buy this nice pontoon boat. You go from maybe a $3,000 boat to a $30,000 boat. So they didn't sell you the boat. You were sold on a boat to begin with because you needed the boat for fishing. They sold you the idea of what the boat can do. And so you bought a nicer boat. And in doing so, you paid 10 times what you initially intended to. Now, there's other things that sold when you went to buy this boat as well. And these are things that weren't even advertised. They just happened to be a consequence of what you needed to use this boat. See, they sold you the fuel needed to power this boat, because a pontoon boat takes a lot more fuel than a little motorized skiff. They sold you on the motors. Pontoon boats often have more than one outboard motor. Most have one, to my knowledge, but I've seen them with two. They've sold you on, they might have sold you on nicer fishing equipment to go with it. Because if you're on a nice pontoon boat, you're going to want a nice rod, right? So, of course, you're going to buy the upgraded rod to go with the pontoon boat. And it might sound silly that, a fishing rod is a fishing rod. Well, no, a fishing rod is not a fishing rod. Believe me, just the reel, there's a big difference between a closed-face reel and an open-face reel and how they interact and how much of a pain in the ass it is when something gets tangled. I haven't been fishing in years, and I still remember that. That was a big part of my childhood. Because I have been in a position where my family has fished to help reduce food costs. And let me tell you, bass tastes really good. They've sold you on the loan you needed to buy the boat. Unless you could buy the boat cash. Very few people can drop 30 grand cash at any given time. I mean, yeah, it's usually a cashier's check, but you know what I mean. You're buying it without debt. They're selling you on the debt necessary to buy the boat. So you see all of the things that they sold you. Oh, they also sold you on the grill to put on the boat. See all of the things that they have sold you on just by putting the idea of the boat. It's not the boat itself. It's the idea of what you're doing on the water. It's the idea of the activities. It's the idea of the experience. And so Facebook and Google have become really efficient at selling you that experience and feeding you what you want to see and hear. And that feedback loops. And so that's all we see in here now, is that feedback loop. We don't see outside of the little world that we create for ourselves these six-sided boxes. And informationally, these tech giants, and I've mentioned only two in this, and I said there are three. The third one is, of course, Twitter, because Twitter does the same thing. But these tech giants have taken this, and they've put all of our information into boxes. And that box has a number, which is your IP address, or your Google account name, or your Facebook login. And it says when someone from this login logs on, we're going to take this box off the shelf, open it up, and feed them whatever's in this box. And whatever they put in as an input from this output that we're feeding them, or for them, they're feeding it as input, and they're pulling from us the things that we input as output. Whatever that person outputs is what we're going to put back in the box for the next time they log in. And that's how we ended up in this rather technological dystopia we're in. This is where the cyberpunk dystopia comes from. So what can we do about it? Well, first off, there isn't a huge amount we can do about it other than be aware of it. No, we live in an endemic surveillance state. Ironically, we're in the only endemic surveillance state where the biggest surveillance of people isn't happening by the government. It's happening by corporations, for better or for worse. Be aware of it. Understand that whatever you put in is going to be fed back to you tenfold. If you're aware of that, you check yourself whenever you start thinking of something. Think about it. If you see something and you think a particular way, be like, okay, am I thinking this because I believe it, or am I thinking this is because this is what the algorithm is feeding me over and over and over again? You know, do I really like boats as much as that Facebook keeps feeding them to me? Because realistically, that's what you need to do. That's how we overcome the echo chamber. Interestingly, that's also why that same feedback loop is why social strata is so prevalent. That's why it's so hard to move up and down the social food chain, or the socioeconomic food chain. And I think that there should probably be an episode dedicated to that. But Dan Lok has a really good TED Talk on it. And I would recommend that you go and find that TED Talk and watch it. He does a whole bit on 70-degree people versus 75-degree people versus 65-degree people. And there's a... You know what? I'll link it right in the description, because I think it's that important. So, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Make sure that you subscribe down below. Share this video, please. The algorithm makes it tough for small channels like mine to grow. So by sharing this video, you are actually having the effect of 100 likes, because other people will see this video even if they don't search for it. The Julien McBain Show is a McBain Manor production. I want to thank you all for watching today. Have a good day.